Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling. An immersive summary. The summer heat pressed down on Privet Drive like a suffocating blanket, but inside number 4, Harry Potter felt an entirely different kind of oppression. Trapped within the sterile walls of his aunt and uncle's house, he endured weeks of enforced silence about the magical world that defined his very existence. The Dursleys treated him like a dangerous animal that might bite if provoked, their fear of his abilities creating an invisible cage more confining than any physical barrier. News from his friends trickled in sporadically through cryptic messages that revealed nothing of substance, leaving Harry to wrestle with nightmares of Voldemort's return and the weight of secrets no 15-year-old should bear alone. The evening that would shatter this monotonous torment began like any other, with Harry and his cousin Dudley walking through the familiar suburban streets. But as they entered the tunnel beneath Magnolia Road, the temperature plummeted with unnatural suddenness. The dark felt like it was closing in, taking away the nice warm sun and making them very, very cold and sad. The Dementors materialized from the shadows like living nightmares, their hooded forms gliding forward with terrifying purpose. Harry watched in horror as his cousin, brutal, bullying Dudley, crumpled under the soul-sucking presence of the creatures, reduced to a whimpering shell of his former self. Drawing his wand with desperate determination, Harry summoned every ounce of happiness he could muster, conjuring his silver stag Patronus to drive back the creatures of darkness. The magical energy crackled through the tunnel as his protective charm battled against the Dementors' overwhelming malevolence. When the creatures finally retreated, leaving behind only the echo of their otherworldly presence, Harry found himself shaking not just from cold, but from the magnitude of what had just occurred. He had used magic outside of school, breaking wizarding law in full view of his Muggle cousin. The rescue came swiftly, as members of the Order of the Phoenix materialized to whisk Harry away from the chaos of his shattered suburban prison. As they soared through the London night sky, leaving behind the only home he had ever known with the Dursleys, Harry felt the complex mixture of relief and apprehension that comes with stepping into the unknown. The lights of the city spread below them like scattered stars, carrying him toward Grimmauld Place and whatever new trials awaited him in the hidden headquarters of those who fought against the darkness he had just faced. The ancient townhouse at number 12 Grimmauld Place emerged from the London fog like a secret rising from the depths of history itself. Harry stepped through its threshold and found himself thrust into a world where rebellion wore the faces of the adults he had always trusted. The Order of the Phoenix revealed itself not as the heroic organization he might have imagined, but as a desperate band of witches and wizards fighting a war that most of the magical world refused to acknowledge existed. Moody's special eye kept turning, watching closely. Sirius Black walked quietly in his old home like a wolf in a cage. He felt bad after being locked up for years and wished he could do something important, but maybe he wouldn't get the chance. The house itself seemed to breathe with malevolent history, its walls lined with the mounted heads of house elves, its corridors echoing with the shrieks of a portrait that could not be permanently silenced. Mrs. Black's painted fury served as a constant reminder that even in their sanctuary the forces of darkness had deep roots. Harry learned that Voldemort had returned, not to a world ready to fight him, but to one determined to bury its head in the sand. The Ministry of Magic, led by the willfully blind Cornelius Fudge, had branded both Harry and Dumbledore as attention-seeking liars, turning their greatest defenders into public enemies. The disciplinary hearing loomed over Harry like an executioner's blade, promising to strip away his wand and sever his connection to the magical world forever. When the day arrived, the Ministry's cold marble corridors felt more like a tomb than a seat of justice. Harry found himself seated in chains in the depths of Courtroom 10, facing a panel of 50 wizards whose faces ranged from hostile to coldly indifferent. The weight of their collective skepticism pressed down upon him as Fudge read the charges with theatrical pomposity, clearly expecting this to be less a trial than a public execution of Harry's credibility. But Dumbledore's sudden appearance shifted the entire atmosphere of the courtroom like lightning splitting a storm cloud. The headmaster's calm authority filled the stone chamber as he methodically dismantled the prosecution's case, invoking ancient laws and presenting evidence with the precision of a master strategist. Mrs. Figg's testimony about the Dementors provided the crucial witness account that transformed Harry from a rule-breaking delinquent into a young man who had acted in legitimate self-defense. When the final vote was cast and Harry's name was cleared, the relief that flooded through him felt like emerging from deep water into sunlight. He was free to return to Hogwarts to continue his magical education and to stand with those who would fight against the gathering darkness that only he and a precious few were brave enough to acknowledge. The Hogwarts Express carried Harry back to a school transformed by willful ignorance and institutional cruelty. The familiar castle walls now felt like prison stones as whispers followed him through corridors where once he had walked as a hero. Students averted their eyes or stared with naked curiosity, their minds poisoned by months of ministry propaganda that painted him as either a delusional attention-seeker or an outright liar. The Daily Prophet's relentless campaign had done its work. Even among those who had once cheered his name, doubt festered like an infected wound. In the defense against the dark arts classroom, Harry encountered a new kind of darkness wearing a pink cardigan and a sickeningly sweet smile. Dolores Umbridge arrived like a plague dressed in lace, her saccharine voice dripping with false concern as she introduced a curriculum designed to render students helpless against the very forces gathering strength beyond the castle walls. Her refusal to acknowledge Voldemort's return was not mere denial, it was a weapon wielded against anyone who dared speak the truth. When Harry's frustration finally erupted in class, her punishment revealed the true depth of her sadism. The blood quill carved "I must not tell lies" into his own flesh, each letter a scar that would remind him of the price of honesty in a world gone mad. As Umbridge's iron grip tightened around Hogwarts like a vice, students found themselves stripped of the knowledge they would need to survive the coming storm. Her educational decrees multiplied daily, each one designed to crush a little more spirit, silence a few more voices. The walls seemed to close in as detentions became torture sessions, and teaching became nothing more than reading sanitized theory from approved textbooks. Harry's hand throbbed with each new scar, but worse than the physical pain was watching his fellow students accept this new reality with resigned submission. Yet from this oppression, rebellion bloomed like wildflowers through concrete. In the dark area of the pub, Harry was with people wanting to learn secrets and how to not die. Hermione's brilliant mind had conceived of something that would shake Umbridge's regime to its foundations, a secret army of students willing to learn what their professor refused to teach. As nervous whispers gave way to determined planning, Harry realized he was no longer just a student returning to school, but a teacher preparing warriors for a war that was no longer coming. It had already begun. The formation of what would become Dumbledore's army marked the moment when hope refused to die, even in the darkest of educational winters. The corridors of Hogwarts had never felt more suffocating. Under Dolores Umbridge's watchful pink gaze, the ancient castle transformed into a surveillance state where whispered conversations died mid-sentence and students glanced nervously over their shoulders. Her educational decrees multiplied like a plague, each new proclamation stripping away another freedom, another tradition, another piece of the Hogwarts they once knew. But in the hidden depths of the castle, rebellion flickered to life. The Room of Requirement became their sanctuary, a secret chamber that materialized when desperate hearts needed it most. Here Harry Potter stood before his fellow students, no longer the reluctant celebrity but a determined teacher sharing the defensive magic that could save their lives. Wands sparked and shields shimmered as Dumbledore's army trained in defiance of the Ministry's stranglehold. Each successful disarming charm and perfectly cast Patronus became an act of rebellion, a declaration that they would not surrender their right to protect themselves. Yet as the DA flourished in secret, Harry's mind became a battlefield of its own. Visions crashed through his consciousness like lightning strikes, fragmented images of corridors he'd never walked, emotions that weren't his own, and a creeping darkness that felt disturbingly familiar. The night Mr. Weasley fell, Harry's scream shattered the dormitory silence as he witnessed the attack through eyes that weren't his own. The serpent strike, the spreading pool of blood, the terrible satisfaction that flooded through him, it was too real, too immediate to be merely a dream. The aftermath brought a chilling realization. Somehow, impossibly, Harry was connected to Voldemort's mind. As Mr. Weasley fought for his life in St. Mungo's, Harry grappled with the horrifying truth that he had not only seen the attack, but had felt the attacker's savage joy. Professor Snape's occlumency lessons began with brutal efficiency, each session a mental invasion that left Harry raw and exposed. The potions master's penetrating stare became a nightly torment as he attempted to teach Harry to shield his thoughts, to build walls in his mind that even the Dark Lord couldn't breach. But with each painful lesson, Harry wondered if he was learning to keep Voldemort out, or if something far more sinister was already taking root within him. The world seemed to crack open like a rotten egg, spilling its poisonous contents across the wizarding realm. News of the mass breakout from Azkaban struck like a thunderbolt, sending shockwaves through every corner of magical Britain. Death Eaters, the most dangerous servants of darkness, had simply vanished from their supposedly impregnable cells, leaving behind only empty stone and the acrid scent of fear. The fortress that had stood as an unbreakable symbol of justice now gaped like a wound in the ocean, its dementors either fled or turned traitor. Meanwhile, Harry's explosive interview blazed across the pages of the Quibbler like wildfire, his words finally piercing through the Ministry's carefully constructed wall of lies. The truth about Voldemort's return spread with unstoppable momentum, vindicating those who had dared to speak it, and leaving the Ministry scrambling to contain the damage of their own willful blindness. The consequences arrived with devastating swiftness. Dumbledore, the one wizard Voldemort had ever feared, became a fugitive in his own castle. The ancient headmaster's sudden departure left Hogwarts feeling hollow and vulnerable, like a fortress whose cornerstone had been ripped away. Into this vacuum stepped Dolores Umbridge, her sickly sweet smile now backed by absolute authority. The pink plague that had infected the school metastasized overnight into a full-blown tyranny. Educational decrees multiplied like malignant tumours, each one stripping away another piece of the Hogwarts soul, until the castle felt more like a prison than a place of learning. The kids tiptoed, teachers whispered, it felt like they were spied on. But perhaps the cruelest blow came not from the political upheaval swirling around him, but from a glimpse into the past that shattered Harry's most cherished beliefs. In the swirling depths of Snape's Pensieve he witnessed his father, his heroic, noble father transformed into something unrecognizable. James Potter, the man Harry had idealized and longed to emulate, revealed himself as nothing more than a strutting bully, humiliating the young Severus Snape with casual cruelty that made Harry's stomach churn. The scene played out like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His father's arrogant laughter, Snape's helpless rage, the jeering crowd of onlookers. Every detail carved itself into Harry's memory with surgical precision, each moment rewriting the story he had told himself about who his father was, who he himself might become. The hero worship that had sustained him through his darkest moments crumbled to ash, leaving him to confront the devastating possibility that the darkness he feared within himself might not be Voldemort's influence at all, but something far more personal, his own inherited legacy of cruelty. The castle walls seemed ready to pop with excitement when OWL arrived. Examinations descended upon Hogwarts like a gathering storm. Students bent over their parchments in the Great Hall, quills scratching frantically against the oppressive silence, while outside the ancient stones the wizarding world teetered on the precipice of chaos. Each exam question felt trivial against the backdrop of escaped Death Eaters and a ministry in denial, yet the relentless march of academic expectation ground onward. Harry found himself wrestling not just with transfiguration theory and potions ingredients, but with the weight of a world that seemed determined to ignore the darkness creeping ever closer to their doorstep. The fragile normalcy that the examinations represented shattered completely when Hagrid's departure sent shockwaves through the remaining threads of Hogwarts' soul. The gentle giant's forced exit felt like watching a beloved family member dragged away in chains, his empty hut standing as a stark monument to everything they had lost. Students whispered in corridors about the ministry officials who had come in the night, about the struggle that had left scorch marks on the pumpkin patch, about how even Hogwarts' most innocent traditions were being systematically dismantled. The groundskeeper's absence left a gaping hole in the heart of the school, as if someone had torn away one of the castle's fundamental pillars. It was in this atmosphere of mounting dread that Harry's worst nightmare materialized with crystalline clarity. The vision struck him like a physical blow during his History of Magic, OWL, Professor Binns's droning voice fading into meaningless noise as Harry's consciousness hurtled through space and time. There, in the cold depths of the Department of Mysteries, he saw Sirius, his godfather, his last connection to family, writhing in agony under Voldemort's merciless torture. The scene played out in excruciating detail, Sirius's defiant face twisted in pain, his hoarse voice calling Harry's name, the Dark Lord's serpentine features contorted with malicious pleasure. Every fibre of Harry's being screamed that this was real, that his godfather was dying while he sat powerless in an examination hall. The decision crystallized in Harry's mind with the sharp clarity of breaking glass. Academic obligations, personal safety, even common sense, everything dissolved before the singular burning need to save the man who had offered him a home, a future, a chance at the family he had always craved. As his fellow students continued their examinations, blissfully unaware of the horror unfolding in his vision, Harry rose from his seat with the grim determination of a soldier marching into battle. The rescue mission that formed in his mind was desperate, probably foolish, and almost certainly doomed, but it was also inevitable. For in a world where truth had become treason and silence had become complicity, sometimes the only choice left was to act, consequences be damned. The night air whipped through Harry's hair as he gripped the skeletal neck of the Thestral, its leathery wings beating silently against the star-studded sky. Below him, the lights of Hogwarts grew smaller until they were mere pinpricks in the darkness, while ahead, the sprawling glow of London beckoned like a beacon of destiny. His friends flanked him on their own winged mounts, these invisible creatures that only those who had witnessed death could see, their faces set with the same grim determination that pounded in Harry's chest. The flight felt both eternal and fleeting, each wing-beat carrying them closer to answers that had haunted Harry's dreams. The Department of Mysteries loomed before them like a fortress of secrets buried deep beneath the Ministry of Magic, its corridors stretching into shadow and uncertainty. As they descended through the cool London air and made their way into the building's depths, Harry's scar pulsed with an urgency that made his vision blur at the edges. The department revealed itself as a labyrinth of impossibilities, rooms that defied logic and doorways that led to chambers filled with wonders and terrors beyond imagination. Time itself seemed to bend and twist in the corridors as they pressed forward, following the invisible thread that pulled Harry deeper into the mystery. His friends moved like shadows beside him, their footsteps echoing in the otherworldly silence, each step bringing them closer to a truth that would change everything. In the heart of the department, surrounded by thousands of glowing orbs that hummed with captured prophecies, Harry finally found what had been calling to him. The prophecy, his prophecy, sat waiting on its shelf like a small sun containing the weight of his entire future. As his fingers closed around the glass sphere, the whispered words of fate began to spill forth, revealing the terrible burden he had carried unknowingly since birth. The knowledge settled over him like a shroud, heavy with the understanding that some destinies cannot be escaped, only embraced. The prophecy's revelation shattered the eerie silence of the Department of Mysteries like a stone through glass. Harry's fingers trembled around the glowing orb as the weight of destiny pressed down upon his shoulders, but the moment of terrible understanding was brutally cut short. Death Eaters materialized from the shadows like wraiths, their black robes billowing as they surrounded Harry and his friends with predatory grins. The Hall of Prophecies erupted into chaos as curses flew like deadly fireworks, shattering countless orbs and releasing fragments of futures that would never be. What followed was a desperate flight through the department's impossible chambers, a nightmarish chase that led them stumbling through rooms where time moved like honey, where brains floated in mysterious tanks, and where love itself was studied behind glass. Harry's friends fought with fierce determination, their faces pale but resolute as they battled against overwhelming odds. Each spell cast felt like a heartbeat in the thunderous symphony of battle, while Harry clutched the prophecy like a lifeline, knowing it held the key to everything, yet fearing what its complete revelation might mean. The tide of battle seemed to turn when familiar faces burst through the darkness, members of the Order of the Phoenix arriving like avenging angels. Sirius Black fought with the wild grace of a man finally free to protect what he loved most, his laughter echoing even amid the deadly dance of spells. For a brief shining moment hope blazed as bright as any curse, but fate, cruel and inexorable, had other plans. A flash of green light, a look of surprise frozen on beloved features, and then Sirius was falling through an ancient archway that swallowed him whole, leaving only the echo of Harry's anguished cry to mark his passing. The very air seemed to crack with malevolent presence as Voldemort himself materialized in the atrium, his red eyes blazing with fury at being denied his prize. What followed was a duel of legends, Dumbledore arriving like a force of nature to face his former student in a battle that shook the very foundations of the Ministry. Water rose like living serpents, fire bloomed into phoenixes, and magic itself seemed to bend reality around the two most powerful wizards of their age. Harry watched through tears and rage as his headmaster fought not just for victory, but for the very soul of the wizarding world, each spell a testament to the thin line between salvation and destruction. It felt like a scary storm left mess in the Ministry Hall after the fight. Smoke curled from scorched marble floors where the greatest duel of the age had just concluded, and Harry Potter stood among the debris with tears still burning tracks down his dirt-stained cheeks. The prophecy lay in fragments at his feet, its crystal shell destroyed, its secrets scattered like whispered promises on the wind. Yet the most crushing weight was not the broken glass, but the gaping absence where Sirius Black's laughter should have been echoing still. In the quiet sanctuary of Dumbledore's office, surrounded by sleeping portraits and the gentle whisper of Fawkes's wings, the full truth finally unfurled like a map of destiny Harry had never wanted to read. The headmaster's ancient eyes, heavy with the burden of knowledge kept too long in shadow, revealed the complete prophecy that had shaped Harry's life before he could even walk. Each word fell like a stone into still water, creating ripples that reached back through 15 years of carefully orchestrated protection and forward into an uncertain future where only one could survive. Harry learned of love's ultimate sacrifice, how his mother's death had created a magic so profound it lived in his very blood, and how the Dursleys' grudging shelter had sustained that protection year after year. The revelation transformed everything Harry thought he understood about his life, painting Dumbledore's distant kindness and seemingly cruel decisions in stark new light. Here was a man who had carried the weight of a child's destiny in his hands, who had chosen between Harry's happiness and Harry's survival with the cold calculation of a chess master moving pieces across an endless board. The knowledge sat in Harry's chest like swallowed fire, terrible and illuminating, burning away the last vestiges of his childhood while forging something harder and more determined in its place. When Minister Fudge finally acknowledged what the entire wizarding world could no longer deny, that Lord Voldemort had indeed returned, the admission felt almost anticlimactic after the night's revelations. The Ministry's machinery lurched back into motion like a great beast awakening from wilful slumber, but Harry found himself curiously detached from the political theatre. He had moved beyond the need for official validation into a realm where truth existed independent of public acknowledgement, where the real battle lines had already been drawn in blood and prophecy. The return to Privet Drive carried a different weight this time, as if Harry were walking back into a life that no longer quite fit him. But now he understood the invisible threads that bound him to this place, not just Dumbledore's arrangements or the Ministry's expectations, but something deeper and more powerful than either. As he crossed the threshold into the Dursleys' world of aggressive normalcy, Harry carried with him not just grief for Sirius or anger at Destiny's cruel design, but a crystalline understanding of his purpose. The boy who had stumbled blindly through his first 5 years at Hogwarts was gone, replaced by someone who finally knew both the full scope of his burden and the true strength he possessed to bear it. The war was coming whether he was ready or not, but for the first time Harry Potter walked forward with his eyes wide open to both the darkness ahead and the light he carried within himself.